everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today we're going to be taking a look at how to service a transmission in a 2001 Toyota Highlander V6 all-wheel drive. Doing this repair yourself is actually a little trickier than you might think. There is a tip I have for you later on in the video that you pretty much have to do in order to make this repair completable. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. So here is the front of our vehicle. I'm going to show you where we're going to be working today. Right back here. So with our drain pan ready, we can remove our drain bolt, and joy of joys, Toyota was nice enough to give us a drain bolt. You don't know how many makes and models don't have these, so it is quite the luxury that Toyota gave this to us. There we go. Once it gets to this stage, we can go ahead and replace the drain plug there, just so it doesn't dribble on us while we're removing bolts. There we go. So now we need to remove the bolts, and as you can see, most of them are fairly accessible, but this frame section is quite in the way. It's going to be tricky to get in there. But what you can do is come in through the side right here with a wrench and get those out first. So as you can see in the back corner, there's really no way to get a socket up there, but what you can do is kind of sneak a wrench up there and give it basically a quarter turn at a time. And yeah, it's pretty tedious, but that's how this is done. So what I'm going to do, it's a little bit of an advanced technique here, getting these last bolts out. Actually, the first ones I'm doing, so nothing falls on top of me while I'm dealing with tedious bolts. So what I've done is I'm putting a screw jack right here, and I'm going to lift the engine a little bit, stretch the motor mount just a teeny bit, a couple of millimeters at most. Now, if you're doing this on the ground at home, make sure that your jack stands are nice and secure. I even have another screw jack here underneath the brace for the rear differential, so everything is very, very rigid, and I'll show you why I'm doing this. So as I rotate this screw jack up, it's going to give me just a few millimeters more of clearance so I can get that bolt out. Just be very careful when you do this. So I got all those tricky bolts out, and it just took a little bit of time, and my 10mm wrench reaching up like this, and sometimes I have to flip it over so that way it's orientated like this, and then you just slowly remove them. It's not too bad, especially when you have the engine jacked up a little bit like we do. So now with those tricky bolts out, we can go ahead and lower our jack. You can see those bolts are getting more and more difficult by the second as I lower this thing. And we'll get this thing out of there. So these other ones come off really easy. I'm just gonna use my 3/8 impact gun. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave this one in place and maybe one back here so it doesn't just fall on me unexpectedly. Now I only have one bolt remaining, so I'm going to brace it with my right hand or remove it with my left. Set that aside and then remove our pan. There we go. Be careful because it will drain some fluid on you. What we can do now is remove the 3 10mm bolts that hold the filter to the transmission. Okay, so these transmission filters, you just want to pull straight down. Just like that. It might leak some fluid on you. See that? I just reached up in there and pulled out that O-ring. If it doesn't come with your transmission filter, go ahead and peel this O-ring off and feel your finger around in there just to make sure it didn't leave any vulcanized rubber to the metal or anything. So this O-ring is really important to remove. So over here on my workbench, I have our new transmission filter. Got at my local Napa, but I will leave a link down below in the description to a comparable unit. And the reason I like this kit is because it actually comes with a gasket. I am a firm believer in replacing the gasket every single time. There are people out there that will reuse the old gasket. I'm not one of those people. It's just made out of rubber and can fall apart very, very easily. And it'd be a real bear to do this job again when you've just completed it. And we can compare it to our old one to make sure that it is in fact identical, which it is. So this is why it's important to remove the O-ring, because our new unit actually does come with one. Now, our old unit has its old O-ring on there, so make sure the O-ring comes along with the filter, and if not, reach up there and dig it out, because if you double O-ring it, your transmission isn't gonna work, because it'll just build hydraulic pressure and then it'll leak out here. You'll have a non-functioning transmission. And when we're installing our transmission filter, make sure this O-ring is lubricated. You could use a little bit of engine oil, you could use a teeny bit of WD-40, or you can use some ATF. I have a little bit on the end of my finger, and we're just going to put a nice thin film all around the O-ring, just like that, so it's nice and lubricated. Never ever put O-rings on dry. So before we install our filter, I'm gonna get a nice terry towel and just clean that O-ring mating surface off to make sure there's not any residual grime or debris in there. And then I'm gonna grab our new transmission filter and installer, just pushing straight up, just like that, and installing one of the bolts, at least finger tight. Go ahead and replace the other bolts as well. You know, I really couldn't find a torque spec on there, on anywhere really, at least anywhere reliable. If you can find a torque spec, let me know, but honestly, you don't really need one for this. Just wrist tight with your 10mm. Should be plenty. And then try to do it as evenly as possible. You know, just wrist tight is fine. It's just 10mm bolts, and it's only holding a transmission filter on, and it'd be a real bear to snap one of these off. There we go, that's plenty. So now we can turn our attention to our pan. Go ahead and remove the old gasket, and ours looks pretty toast, so I'm just gonna toss that. Again, you could reuse that if you really wanted to. I don't recommend it. That's why I always try to link filters that come with gaskets. Now, inside of here, you might notice that there is two rectangles here. Those are actually magnets inside of the pan, which attract any kind of metal shavings, which is fine. You know, you can rub it between your fingers and you can feel it's nice and smooth. That's not a big deal. If you saw big chunks of metal or a lot of this, like a good portion size of it, well, then your transmission has a problem somewhere. But this one looks perfectly good. So we can just give her a nice clean up and clean off these magnets. Actually move around in the pan, which is kind of cool. So we can remove these magnets and really give them a good cleaning, because the cleaner these magnets are, the more metal shavings stay out of your transmission and the longer it lasts. I do have to recommend using some carburetor spray, link down below in the description. Or if you have a parts washer, you could use that too, but I don't have one of those, so carburetor spray is all good for me. There we go, pan is nice and clean. It actually looks brand new, cleaned up very well. And one thing I want to mention too is go around and make sure that this mating surface right here, where the bolts go through, is super clean. Any kind of dirt or contaminants can make the transmission gasket fail or leak. So we don't want that to happen, so make sure that's nice and clean. Now this next step, a lot of people disagree with. I think it is the way to go because I've been doing this for a long time, and this is how my mentor taught me, is to grab some RTV, not a ton of it, maybe put on the end of your finger, and we're just gonna go around right here. Make sure you don't get any in the pan though. I mean, once it's dry, it's really not gonna go anywhere. And you gotta work a little quickly. You don't want this to set. So we just wanna put it around and then on the inside of the bolt holes. So on the inside, not the outside, but the inside. And I just like to lay a teeny film, I mean very small film of RTV all around here to ensure we don't get any leaks. That's always frustrating to get a job done. You think you're at the end and then you gotta do it again. You don't want to be in that boat. Trust me on that. And you can buy RTV at the link down below in the description, of course. Not a ton, just a little bit on there, a nice thin film around the inside bolts like that. And again, some people just put the gasket on and hit go, and I certainly understand that. But ever since I was taught to do it this way, I haven't gotten any leaks, so I'm gonna keep doing it this way. Now we can kind of figure out which way our gasket goes on, and we can just lay this flat, line up our bolt holes. There we go. This gasket's perfect. Very nice. Before we go any further too, let's go ahead and put our magnets back in. Just kind of put them back to where you found them. The metal will find the magnets. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the gasket with the RTV. Just a nice thin film around the inside. Bolt holes. You know, don't use so much that it might leak into the pan. You know, if there's excess, wipe it off. There we go. Again, a nice thin film. Not too much, just a nice thin film. I can't stress that enough. We're gonna grab some carburetor spray and a terry towel. Spray it on our terry towel there. And then we're gonna go around the gasket mating surface, and if there's any gasket material left, go ahead and scrape it off, because your gasket won't seal to another gasket. So this part's really important to clean off the entire mating surface. And then we can reinstall our transmission pan. And when you're reinstalling it, make sure you just go straight up with it. You don't wanna like swoosh it around. Just want to have it kind of go straight on like that. Squirm it around too much, the gasket will shift and it won't seal at all. Got 2 in, it's pretty good. And then you want to install in a cross pattern as much as you can. And then we can just reinstall all our bolts. So I want to show the little technique, kind of had to make up on the fly here to get out and put back in these bolts. And what I do is I grab a ratcheting 10mm wrench. I put it on the bolt I want to remove or put on. You can even load up the ratcheting wrench. And then to apply pressure, I grab a small standard screwdriver. These are Phillips as well. Just so it has some pressure on there so you can tighten or loosen, you know, like the last couple threads or something. Eventually you don't need the screwdriver either. And then you get to this point where the lip of the pan interferes with the ratcheting wrench. So what you have to do then is get a regular 10mm wrench, invert it, and use it like this. So it's a little tedious, but it's not too bad. And when you're tightening, just make sure you put the pan on as evenly as possible. So, you know, start in this corner and then goes down to this corner and then back up and then over there and then here and then down there, and, you know, just try to walk it on as evenly as you can. It's a little more difficult than putting on, you know, lug nuts evenly because there's just so many bolts. And as far as tightness goes on these, I know everyone is just obsessed with torque specs these days, but I couldn't find one on AllData or on the Toyota installers page. So I mean, I'm sure there is a torque spec, I'm sure it's somewhere, but I couldn't find it, so they're just 10mm bolts. You know, just, that's good enough. Just snug. You know, it's probably something like 11 or 15 foot-pounds. It's gonna be lighter than you think. So when you're tightening down a pan like this with a rubber gasket, what tends to happen is as you tighten the pan down onto it, the rubber gasket will swedge out, it'll flatten out, and it'll kind of go like this around the material, which means that the bolts will loosen up and you'll have a leak. So just go around them maybe 3 or 4 times to make sure they're nice and snug, and will seal up nicely for you. But don't go crazy on the tightness, because if you go too tight, you can actually split that rubber gasket, which obviously wouldn't be very good. So, you know, maybe forearm tight. And then make sure to do the pain in the neck ones too, because if it's gonna leak, I will bet you a case of beer it's gonna be the pain in the neck ones over here on the right side of your screen. Go ahead and remove that drain bolt again. I want to take a look at the washer. So go ahead and take a look at the washer that comes off of the drain bolt. This one's actually in stellar condition, so I'm okay reusing it. And the bolt is in excellent condition as well. If either of these items are not in perfect condition, go ahead and replace them. Or if your transmission kit came with a new washer, go ahead and install it and reinstall our bolt. So snug that bad boy up. Now I did find a torque spec on the tightness of the drain plug. It's 35 foot-pounds. Got my torque wrench loaded up. If you don't have a torque wrench, understand one arm tight is probably good. There we go, 35 foot-pounds. And that is nice and installed. Now, if you used RTV like I did for this seal, which I recommend, go ahead and wait for the curing time of that RTV. Ours is about an hour, so we're gonna wait an hour and then we can replace our fluid. But if you didn't use RTV, you can move on immediately. Put some carburetor spray on a terry towel and clean up our mess. There we go, that looks much better. So the ATF we're going to be using today is this Valvoline Max Life ATF, recommended for most Toyotas, which this is, so go ahead and use this. I've left a link down below in the description to this and the Toyota recommended stuff. So on all data it says that when you're doing a drain and fill like this, to put 4.9 quarts in, I'm going to put 3 quarts in and check it, just to see what the cold level is, and then we can turn the car on and see what the hot level is going to be. Nope, didn't even come up on the end of the stick, so I'll keep adding. And don't check the level too closely to adding quarts, just because there still can be transmission fluid on the sides of the dip tube, and your dipstick will read a false reading. Okay, so right there, it's showing up on the end of the dip tube there, so we're at basically the top of the cold. So what we can do is turn the car on and go through some gears. What you want to do is turn the car on in park and then shift through the gears, you know, park, neutral, drive, reverse. You want to go through those and make sure it shifts into those, and then put it back into park and check the fluid again, and we'll get an idea of what the fluid's like when the engine's running and the transmission pump's on. So we can go ahead and check the level of transmission fluid we got when the thing's on in park. And you can see it's just a smear on the end of the dipstick here, so it needs more. So now you can see the bulk of the fluid is right about where my right thumb is, so that's pretty much perfect. So all data is right, 4.9 quarts is right on the money. So that is how to service your transmission for an 01 Toyota Highlander V6 all-wheel drive. There's a little more to it than an average transmission service, so it might be something you would want to maybe take your car in to do. It would be a little challenging to do it in your driveway or your garage, but I will tell you that if you take this thing in, it's probably going to be like a $400 service. So if you're someone that is capable of doing this, you can save yourself like $370 by doing the work yourself, because I think the filter and gasket is about $50 or so. And I've left links down below in the description to everything I used here today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time.